Hello, I'm Stephen Robinson. Welcome to the Play Typer Guy podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe. If you're listening to the podcast, please consider leaving a review. Don't forget to subscribe to the Play Typer Guide newsletter for fresh content sent straight to your inbox. My guest today is legal journalist Liz Dye from the Law and Chaos podcast and newsletter. She writes about the intersection between law and politics, and she's going to walk us through the current state of the multiple Donald Trump trials. So let's jump right in while my wife is still listening. Thank you. Hey, Liz, thanks for joining us.
Hi, how are you?
And so, Liz, I'm really excited to talk to you because you specifically, you've been covering Donald Trump's legal issues for what must seem like 1,000 years.
Yeah,
And
it's like dog years. Covering Donald Trump is like anything with Trump is dog years.
so, something I've observed and written about myself is that normal people aren't as plugged into politics on a daily basis as you and I are. They
Right.
are almost oblivious to everything that's good. It's like a cloud, and this runs the gamut of like college educated people, working class folks. I've tried to talk to as many people from many
hmm
different walks of life as possible, and it's sort of that's a common theme of really not kind of almost a cloud about his issues and often viewing this as sort of a otherwise normal political campaign, sort of a rematch between Trump and Biden. And
Yeah.
um, when obviously it's far from normal that a major political candidate is someone under indictment for serious felonies. I did well in history. That seems relatively unique.
Yeah.
And including only with mild hyperbole, espionage and insurrection.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't think that's at all hyperbole. He is indeed charged under the Insurrection Act, and he was impeached for incitement, although not convicted in the Senate. Right. This is some crazy stuff.
So, so what I would ask you to start this off, as someone who has processed all of this and written about this for so long, if you're talking to someone, to a normal person, what is sort of the clear, focused narrative regarding the legal cases against Trump? Uh,
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that there is a clear focus narrative, the plan is delay, 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 right? That is the narrative from Trump world, and in some sense, it is actually working. His plan is to delay these trials as long as possible, and let me back up. Trump is under 4 indictments, right? So he's under indictment in the state of New York for that's the case most people think of as the weakest. That's in connection, it's false business records created in connection with the Stormy Daniels payoff in 2016. Most people think this is not an amazing case. That is theoretically going to trial in March. We shall see. He's been charged in Georgia in that ginormous RICO suit with, 18 other defendants. And that one looks to be a little bit on the rocks too, to the extent that it was ever going to go to trial before the election. It's now super in doubt because there's issues with the prosecutor, Bonnie
mhm.
Willis, who was revealed to be in a romantic relationship with the special prosecutor hired by her office. There is a strong possibility that case is going to be that she's going to be disqualified, and not just that she would be disqualified from prosecuting, but that her entire office would be disqualified, which would mean that it would have to be assigned to a new office. So, God knows when that's going to happen. And, if it's assigned to a prosecutor that doesn't want to prosecute this case in the same way, it might be DOA. So that's up in the air. In the Southern District of Florida, he's charged in the documents case for retaining all of those classified documents and government documents generally, and refusing to give them back even when subpoenaed. And in the U.S. District Court in District of Columbia, he's charged with the January 6th crimes. He's not charged with incitement, he's not charged with insurrection, but he is charged with obstructing Congress and obstructing the counting of the vote. So that trial was just taken off the calendar. It was scheduled for March 4, but it was taken off of the calendar on Friday by Judge Tanya Chutkin in deference to the reality that the U.S. that the U.S. Circuit Court, the Court of Appeals in D.C., has not ruled on Trump's claim of immunity, and thus it's just not going to be timely. There won't be enough time to meet the original trial date.
Mhm.
So those are the cases that are there. But as you can see, he's been able to push them off by various stratagems. We can talk about them, but I don't realistically think that any of them is going to go. I mean, maybe New York will go. I don't know for sure.
Mhm. Um, and even curious enough, even his political opponents are running on, well, please vote for me and maybe I will uh, pardon Trump. I know Nikki Haley had said that because
Yeah.
it sucks when old people go to prison because that's something that doesn't happen now. Like
Uh
if you're over the age of 75, you are immune from prosecution in the United States, apparently. So,
uh-huh. Yeah.
so, uh,
As
you
long
know,
as you
uh,
can shout immunity loud enough over and over again and without shame. Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a problem. It's definitely a problem, and law Twitter is having a big argument today about whether what remains of law Twitter. It's all at Blue Sky now. Law Sky is having a big argument today about whether this is Merrick Garland's fault for dawdling in these prosecutions, and I think that that's it's unclear to me.
mhm.
Certainly, when he appointed special counsel Jack Smith. I believe it was in April of 2022 when Trump declared, and so that immediately triggered the appointment of the special counsel. And I mean, whatever you think about the speed with which I'm sorry, Attorney General Merrick Garland um, pursued these cases, it was rocket boosted once Special Counsel Jack
Absolutely.
Smith was assigned. So yeah, there was a way to investigate this faster, and you know that because once there was a different prosecutor, it went a lot faster.
Let me ask you about Garland for a bit, since you brought him up, because whenever I had written about him in the past, he had a lot of defenders who were just like, he's got his record, he knows what he's doing. You're not a lawyer, you don't. He's the expert, I was not like I was basing my articles on resistance Twitter or resistance
Hmm.
Democrat stuff. It would be like I would think I'd be in the clear because it would be Adam Schiff, Claire McCaskill, like people who weren't viewed as relatively modern,
Hmm.
in that realm and had experience in law, where like I don't know what's happening, what's going on, and there was still a sense of no, he's taking his time, and perhaps in fairness to him, it's just sort of this situation where someone has tried to overturn a free and fair election, wanted to remain in office, had assistance doing that.
Hmm.
Um, it's not like any other crime, like because the political realities do matter. So there's a clock was ticking as soon as he was appointed. Um, you know, i- with one deadline being 2022, right? Because if you get a hostile Congress who's clearly in Trump's pocket, that would be an issue. And then if he could literally return, and so that's what I think a lot of people, again, on legal skies, are freaking out because
Lost guy, yeah.
lost guy. These folks are, uh, it's all gone if he gets back in office. Like most any federal case against him, my understanding would just go away on on day one. He
Well, it
has that
wouldn't
authority,
magically disappear, right? He either pardoned himself or he would, fire special counsel Jack Smith and dare Congress to do anything about it, right? The point of appointing a special counsel is that they're supposed to be independent of the political influence. And so, theoretically he wouldn't be able to fire him, but that's not, I mean, Trump does what he's going to do and then he dares Congress to do something about it. And from all reporting, if he returns to the White House, he'll be completely, unchained, right? He's not
right?
going to care about the laws and because he's going to know, right? What are they going to do? Impeach him again? He's not it's not going to happen, right?
Yeah.
He's already had his lawyer argue to the US District Court, I'm sorry, to the Circuit Court in DC that even if he kind of shoots somebody, he's not impeached for it, he can never be tried again, right? Like he's made these maximalist arguments and not just in court, right? His allies have said very clearly, there's a lot of reporting in publications like Rolling Stone that he's just going to do crazy shit when he gets back in office.
Oh yeah. Well, there is, and I think it's part of a larger discussion of like when people are saying, let's bring the good Republicans back, for instance, and so forth.
Who would those
Um,
be?
there
Are you
is a
saying that?
structure. There is a different structure, because
Uh-huh.
um, Nikki Haley is a lot like, I would say, Gorsuch, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney, but like essentially establishment. It's not like Trump nominated Stephen Miller, Matt Gaetz, and Marjorie Greene to the Supreme Court, and they went crazy and overturned Roe and all this. It was like, no, no, no. This is sort of, in fact, a lot of pro democracy Republicans, ranging from Adam Kinzinger to Liz Cheney, were very pleased with that was his saving grace. Trump's saving grace was his judiciary. So there's this moment here of where it's like there's a lot of post Dobbs, and it's not just women, but predominantly the women, the backlash to Roe being overturned. It was like, oh wait, like this sort of what I thought was team normal of Republicans, even if I disagree with them politically, because I want to reinforce Amy Coney Barrett is not Marjorie Greene. She's not Lauren Boebert. She's not MAGA. So she's more like Haley. And that is a overt threat to what's happening to a lot of people right now. So I think people are in that sense of, I think the party itself is kind of corrupt. And I guess the question I'm getting to with you is sort of, do you think there's also that sense from a lot of Republicans who are not going too far the jugular on Trump, is the idea like, okay, well, either if he wins, let's say he dies, and then if it's Haley's his vice president, then we get everything. We still get everything we want. Maybe he goes to prison. We still get everything we want. There's a lot of pros to backing him, regardless.
Yeah, I'm going to push back a little bit because I understand the line that you're drawing, right, between the normie Republicans and MAGA weirdos, right? Because
Mhm.
I think that there has been some pushback, not just from people like Mitt Romney and Liz Cheney, but I think that the median justices on the Supreme Court, and I would include Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett, and to some extent Neil Gorsuch in that, they don't really want Trump. They don't really want Trump around anymore. He's really
Mhm.
bad for the brand, right? What they
Mhm.
want is to enact conservative social policy and conservative business policy, right? And
Mhm.
and they want to kneecap the administrative state, right? I'm sure that you've discussed Chevron deference on this show, but basically what they want is to make it harder for governments to do things. Essentially, now that they control the judiciary pretty, they've got 6-3 on that court, and they think that they're going to hold it for a while. What they want is for the judiciary to be able to cancel laws that are passed in the states, and also to cancel any kind of executive action at will, to make themselves have more power.
Mhm.
And Trump isn't really helpful in that project,
No.
right? Because Trump is a crazy person. He's extraordinarily undisciplined. He doesn't care. And so they have not, the Supreme Court, even as it is now constituted, has not jumped to bail him out,
Mhm.
right? So he tried to thwart a bunch of the January 6th investigation by asserting executive privilege to block the release of his presidential records from the National Archives. They didn't do anything about that. I don't think that they're going to give him this immunity that he wants, right? I believe that sometime in the next week, I'm not sure when you're going to air this interview, but sometime in the week of February 5th, the DC Circuit is going to say, no, Trump is not immune from prosecution for acts committed while in office. And I don't think that the Supreme Court is going to bail him out. I'm not sure that they're going to take
Oh, sure.
certiorari. Yeah, I don't think so. That they don't want Trump, right? What they want is to get rid of Dobbs. They might want to get
Mhm.
rid of the Mifa Pristone case is coming up. They're not going to expend, I think, political capital on Trump because they're not MAGA. They're normie Republicans, and they're going to try and do terrible things. But I don't think putting Trump back in office is one of
Oh
them.
yeah, I think I guess where I was getting at there is more of the sense of Trump has been useful to those ends. So it's not,
Hmm.
he and I was always trying to figure that out, because it's like, well, why? I was of the opinion that, well, Rubio, Cruz, Kasich, Jeb,
Right.
they would have nominated the exact same judiciary. There's very little. In
Mhm.
fact, Trump is so incompetent, as you described, so chaotic. I strongly believe that the Affordable Care Act only exists now because he was president and not Rubio or Jeb or whatever, who might have been able to, like, he was not able to ever really he's just all chaos. And he was able to help, as you were saying, these folks in the sense of giving them power, but
Yes.
that's the extent of it. I do think the dilemma, and that becomes perhaps the politics of it that we're about to see, and I would love your opinion on this, is that there's everyone's like, well, why don't they just cut him loose and move on? I feel like there's, unfortunately, and I think this is a calculation that um, once speaker for less than a year, Kevin McCarthy, had made, was that there is no way to cut Trump loose without massive losses, without, you may perhaps even a decade of loss of power, because Trump will take MAGA with him. There was a lot of former, either irregular voters or even voters who had once voted for Obama or in Clinton in the past, who
Mhm.
were with Trump, and they wouldn't. I mean, Marjorie Green said something that really stood out to me, where she was talking about how she had voted for Trump twice, but didn't vote for Romney or McCain. And obviously, she wasn't voting for Obama in those
Right.
cases. So it's like, those are the voters that I think Republicans know, you know, we get Nikki Haley up there, we're going to get slaughtered, because Trump is going to like not support us. And so the politics is he is our best hope. Not a great one, but he's our best hope. Whereas,
Right.
you think there's something else going on with their
I
support for
I
him?
think I would agree with you from a political perspective. He is indeed, he has swallowed the party whole, right? He's swallowed the GOP whole. It's become basically a Trump cult, and none of them can win without him, which is why they all fell back in line, right? They had a chance to get rid of Trump, and they chose not to, right? They could have impeached him and made sure, right? It only would have taken a few more of them to have, a little bit of courage, right? And they didn't have the political will. None of them was willing to risk the political blowback, and now he's just, even in exile, continued to swallow their party and continue to habituate their voters to a really unhealthy media diet, and a media diet which conditions them to believe things which are clearly not true, right? Obviously that the election was stolen, but look, I cover his trials and I also read his Truth Social, and he says a lot of crazy things every single day. Like, he's significantly crazy. You and I know, because you and I worked together at Wonket for years, and we remember starting the day with his tweets, and those tweets were nuts. But he is so far off the flat edge of the earth now, because when he was in Twitter, and when Twitter was kind of the center of the media universe, his his media diet included things like the New York Times and the Washington Post, and he tweets out links to like the Gateway Pundit every day. Tweets he burps them out or whatever. He truths them. I refuse to say that. But on his social media platform, the media that he links to is completely nuts, and that's the media that he's feeding these people, along with a steady stream of lies. So he's told all of these crazy lies about the legal process that he's been in, and used it to kind of focus all of this hatred on the opposing sides, and to defame E. Jean Carroll, which led to the second lawsuit in part. He's nuttier. He's way nuttier than when you and I every morning for years and years woke up and had
Mhm.
to read his lunatic tweets.
Yeah, he's very much unhinged, and but is speaking a language. And I think historians will study the sort of chicken and examine it, sort of chicken and egg relationship of like, is he radicalized by Fox News and other, or he part of radicalizing Fox News and conservatives and MAG? Like, what is the loop
Mhm.
there? But
Mhm.
I've always said he's sort of like the Fox News viewer made good, given the
Mhm.
age and the demo. So he's like those folks, the uncle you might have ignored, but he's the now kind of head of a major political party.
Mhm.
Um, and I do wonder. I think a lot of kind of normal Republicans, you might have said this, since they exist, if they're having the same experience as I know folks who, again, either center right, centrist Dems, or so forth, who
Mhm.
would say, yeah, this is crazy. No sane person. What Trump just said is nuts. And then like a loved one, so their mother or their father, would regurgitate it, and they don't know what to do, because they haven't to the point where they think, there's someone who doesn't really want to talk politics on, say, Facebook, but they would think, oh, this is not even political, right? Like
Mhm.
this is, and then they would get, a beloved aunt or uncle coming in and regurgitating stuff that is just a, Trump like spiel. And that I think has been terrifying for a lot of people since Trump took the scene of like, oh my God, there's his thinking, such as it is everywhere.
Yeah, and his thinking is wholly conspiratorial and completely, unhinged from the truth. Like one of the things which he said on social media this week was he said he was complaining about the trial in here's a microcosm and an intersection from my legal beat. Laura Loomer is this kind of wackadoodle she's been an alt-right media figure for a long time, and she's now run for Congress in Florida in a district she never was going to win her. She's run against Lois Frankel, who's a longtime Democratic congresswoman, I think in Palm Beach, although Trump endorsed her. Loomer's one of her greatest hits was after she got her Twitter account taken away, she handcuffed herself to the door of the Twitter headquarters as a media stunt. She's off the flat edge of the earth. So she has been posting on Truth Social, or was during the E. Jean Carroll trial, these kind of crazy lies about the judge, saying that his wife was responsible for this anti-MAGA account and that his son was in the courtroom. And like, it wasn't his wife's account. It definitely was not. And she, said it. And the person that Laura Loomer, was pointing to in photographs and saying this is Justice Engoron's son was a New York Post reporter.
Mhm.
But even after all of those things had been repeatedly debunked, Trump continued to put them out on social media and say, the judge is, performing for his family and should have been disqualified. And in fact, after the trial was over, Trump complained how unfair it was and said that, and this is completely fiction, he said that the first two rows were cordoned off with a rope for Justice Engoron's family to attend the trial. Like, that didn't happen. And Trump was like in the courtroom. He knows that didn't happen. Like, he says things and it doesn't matter that they're ridiculously not true. That was building a lie upon a lie, right? The lie was that Justice Engoron's son was watching. Justice Engoron's son, who's a lawyer and who I wouldn't name. And remember, that was after this whole campaign of defamation against Justice Engoron's law clerk, who got deluged with anti-Semitic messages, and that was the gag order in the first trial, right? Like, there are these lies, and the lies they're easily debunked. It doesn't matter. There is no debunking them. To debunk them is to engage with them in a way that, in some sense, blesses them, because he's going to say, "See, they lie, they lie, they lie," and like, that was just fiction. It was just pure
Yeah.
fiction, and he puts it out to his millions of followers. And so from where I sit, it's difficult to know, because I write, obviously at my Substack, Law and Chaos Pod, but also at, Above the Law and at Wonket and Public Notice, about all of these. Like, do you debunk that lie? Do you ignore that lie? How do you deal with it when it's just like an absolute fire hose of nonsense?
And as I studied, decades ago in college, it's sort of one of the reasons of not engaging with Holocaust deniers, for instance, is because it's
Right.
just all it does is to draw. And that's essentially the one argument would be that you don't engage those lies, but you hit him with the actual narrative. Like, for instance, he's a rapist. And something I'd written about was I people are saying, oh, Nikki Haley's really sharpened her attacks against Trump. But what
Hmm.
she's been doing so far has been, saying, oh, he's unhinged, he's whack, all that's sort of true. But,
Hmm.
and these trials are a distraction. It's like, well, why is it a distraction? Like, why say, like, normally, if we're running against someone, and I've likened it to sort of, in 1998, if everyone was just saying, if Republicans were just saying, Bill Clinton is just being distracted by some cases. We're not going to talk about what these cases are in
Hmm.
very gruesome detail and put that in everyone's head, the image of what's happening. We're just going to say, in a general sense, wow, Bill Clinton's really distracted. That doesn't make any sense. It's sort of like, why aren't you saying this guy is such a very clear piece, and Republicans aren't doing it, specifically Nikki Haley. And I took offense to that because she's someone who said that trans youth, trans girls playing in women's sports is the women's rights issue of our time. so a vulnerable trans
Okay.
girl, that's impacting trans women, but your political opponent is a rapist. Like, you
Mhm.
can say it legally. He is a rapist, and
Right, and
you're not
Justice
making that your case.
Yeah, yeah, and Judge Kaplan did say that. Right, Trump's lawyers made a bunch of very bizarre arguments that since, he was only convicted of sexual abuse and not rape, that he was not a rapist, and that gave, Judge Lewis Kaplan about 15 opportunities because they renewed that motion about 15 times. 15 opportunities to say, like, "No, no, no, forcible penetration is rape. It doesn't matter whether you manage to, like, get your penis in there."
Mhm.
Sorry to be graphic, but that's the thing that they've clung to, that they tried very, very hard to get around. I would agree with you, and it's interesting. When I started working at Wonket, lo those many years ago, with our colleague Robin Panacchia, who she knows a lot about the alt right, and at the time I thought, ugh, why are we covering people like Alex Jones? Right, that's like almost 8 years ago now. Why are we giving these people oxygen? And I was wrong. Right, we can't ignore Alex Jones, right? Alex Jones is such an avatar because of his massive loss in that defamation case, or the two defamation cases, the famous Sandy Hook cases, and there's actually still one more pending. Um, he's a kind of an avatar of what happens when you deplatform people and like the dangers, right? He's this whole kind of story. He's a whole morality play about what happens when you do ignore those things, or unchecked. And I do think that the First Amendment issues of that are going to kind of reverberate for a long time. That's still lurking around. One of Donald Trump's favorite things to do is file garbage lawsuits against people who say mean, true things about him. And that's always fun for me to cover because the stakes are a little lower than like, okay, is he gonna, or like a rape trial, or a, is he going to like come back into government? Those are a little lower stakes. But I think you're right that we shouldn't. It's a difficult balance, right? Do you give these people oxygen by writing about them, by giving them pixels, or do you ignore them and say you don't get to be part of the discourse, and I'm not going to like draw attention to your nuttery?
Mhm. No, I think part of it is sort of if you're just reacting and giving. So there's so many stories about Marjorie the Green, who's, aside from being terrible, is a know nothing, do nothing
Right.
actual legislator. Whereas there's so many, particularly women of color, uh, who are actually passing laws, doing things that help people. And it's kind of like, well, you should be elevating those voices rather than writing another. Granted, it's also you're trying to stay in business. And I know for myself, when I worked at One Cat, people would say, "Why are you writing about Martin Luther Green and not this person?" It's like, "Oh, I did. You didn't read it. I can see, I can see the
Right.
view numbers, right?" And so, I forgive me for wanting to actually get viewers, readership. And I think it's sort of a chicken and egg of like, how do you elevate and how do you? I do think someone like Jasmine Crockett does a good job of
Excellent.
going out to those guys and being entertaining, and then someone we can elevate without. So the story is more about how she trashed these terrible people than being about the terrible people that we're sort of arguing with in a vacuum. But back to the, Trump has sort of obviously been making the political and the legal case. So the political one seems more successful. He is, as a confirmed rapist, somehow going to humiliate the former governor of South Carolina in our own state. Basically, that is going to happen.
Yeah. Mhm.
Um, and he's convinced his supporters to fund a billionaire's legal defense fund, which is sort of like you can make a musical parody of that. It's just absurd that these very poor people, often not people a lot of money, are giving him money for his legal defense. But all of his ranting and raving, specifically his choice of lawyers, it's not helping him in court, right? Like, it's not actually benefiting him. He's actually losing in court in the ways that matter. Is that true? True.
Yeah. Okay. So I think you have to kind of divide out between his criminal trials and his civil trials, right? I mean,
It's
like
so
there's a lot of tiers of crazy Trumpland lawyers, and this is right. This is my beat, and just to like loop back a second, I am not insensitive to the fact that my job is to write about Donald Trump. That is what I do. That is my basically my full job, and I do write about some other things, but most of what I write about is Trump's legal issues. Right? Do what responsibility do we in media bear?
absolutely.
Right, by like feeding people's appetite for Trump, 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 and nothing but Trump. Well, okay, I don't have the answer to that one, but I do have the answer on the lawyers, because the lawyers, that's some crazy shit. So, in famously in his civil case, he's represented by this woman, Alina Haba, and she's an amazing. I should send her like a fruit basket every day. She provides me with unending copy because she's such a wackadoo and she's so bad at her job. It's just
Yes.
amazing. So, and it's not funny how she appears to have gotten into Trump's orbit. There is a recent lawsuit which alleges that she was a member at his club at Bedminster, and there was a labor dispute because one of the waitresses was being sexually harassed, actually raped, by her supervisor, or coerced into sex by her supervisor as a condition of her employment. And she hired a lawyer to represent her. And Alina Haba kind of sidled up to her at the breakfast bar and was like, "Hey, I can help you. We can sort this thing out." And kind of convinced this woman to fire her attorney and fobbed her off with what looks like $15,000, which
Mm,
is not the right number. It's not the right number. There's like missing at least one zero and probably a whole lot more. So, probably two zeros. At any rate, at any rate, so that woman is now suing to void the settlement agreement as having been, illegally obtained, and then she's asked for Haba to be referred to the attorney discipline authorities in New
mm,
Jersey, which is where this took place. But in the meantime, that appears to be kind of how she got in. Haba got in with Trump, and she then replaced Trump's longtime lawyer Mark Kazowitz on the E. Jean Carroll case. And you remember there are two cases because one of them got waylaid for 2 years during this argument about whether he had presidential immunity. And he did not, but it took a long time, and then that's why there were two cases. One for um, defamatory statements he made in 2019 when E. Jean Carroll accused him of sexual assault, and one for a statement which he made in 2022, and a claim under the New York Adult Survivors Act, which was enacted in December. Sorry, it was enacted on Thanksgiving in 2022, and she
mm,
immediately filed the second lawsuit. So the second lawsuit, which came to trial first, resulted in a $5 million penalty. Now, Haba did not argue that lawsuit. That was argued by a very competent trial lawyer named Joseph Tacopina. And he's the one that convinced the jury that it hadn't been a rape within the definition of New York law, that it
mm,
was a non-penis penetration. So that was a really good result for Trump. And $5 million is like couch cushion money for Trump, right? He doesn't care. And he's appealed it anyway. In the second trial, he was represented by Alina Haba, who'd been kind of screwing around and pissing off Judge Kaplan for a couple of years by, dilatory motions and, crap filings and not knowing what to do and being obstreperous and obnoxious. And that case, I mean, look, in the first case, it was only for defamatory statements. Now, it was for the original defamatory statements, but it was only for defamation. It wasn't for defamation and sexual assault. And so in the second case, where it was only defamation, an $83 million verdict is a big, as
mm,
compared to the first trial, where it was only a $5 million verdict. That's not just, changing circumstances. That's changed lawyers, right? That Haba made herself so odious in the courtroom, both to the judge and to the jurors, that it seems clear to me. Although, I mean, it seems clear to me that that's one of the reasons that the verdict was so high. Although I am actually on my own podcast at Law and Chaos Pod interviewing a jury expert, and he has a different opinion on that one. So look for that in my feed on
mm.
Monday. He says that is wrong. That is the wrong take. We will see. But Trump has other more competent counsel. I mean, they have to be willing to say and do a lot of tremendously obnoxious things. That they've made claims in the Florida documents case and in the DC election interference case that they need all kinds of crazy discovery to which they're not entitled. They've made facially ridiculous and frivolous allegations of government misconduct. They've charged that this is a election interference itself, that Biden himself is directing these prosecutions to kneecap Trump's electoral prospects this November. And that's very clearly not the case, but that they do things like they file these motions. And a lot of them are former federal prosecutors. They know better, but they
Mhm.
file these motions saying like, well, there's a blind item in the New York Times that says that Trump really wishes that Garland would move faster. And obviously, Biden planted that item as an instruction to Garland to move faster, and thus we should, get the case dismissed or something. I mean, they make all of these
Yeah.
facially stupid motions.
Well, that's what's sort of baffling to me about Nikki Haley's rationale of her campaign or what she's attempting to do,
Right.
because when she argues, she's been arguing electability, which never works. It didn't work in 2016. It tends
Mhm.
not to work, I believe. Um, and I'm not saying electability isn't an issue. I'm just saying that often it's not helpful to persuade people who are really into someone to abandon them. That just doesn't, in my experience, it rarely happens. But she is arguing this, and but it feeds into Trump's sort of stab in the back narrative, which is just like, oh well, Trump is, he's distracted with these cases. We're talking about this and not talking about these other issues. Both of them issues where voters prefer Trump to Haley, immigration and inflation, she had mentioned. So, it seems like she's feeding into, well, obviously, Biden is because that's the narrative, right? Biden's is sicking the Department of Justice on the political opponent.
Mhm.
Okay, well, I should benefit from this and become the nominee. That makes zero sense unless she just goes ahead and makes the moral argument. And I feel like Chris Christie was one of the few who made not that Trump can't win. It's not
Right.
about that he can't win. He should not win. And she is not
Right.
making the should not win argument because he is a rapist, which to me was an ultimate exit ramp, sort of like Marvel comics ditching Jonathan Majors, was just sort of like, okay, we'll see how the trial goes. Okay, we have a verdict, go away. And here it's like, okay, side of and her refusal to do that is just baffling to me. Because how did else does she think she could possibly win without gaining some sort of, even sort of benefiting from that Biden's, the Democratic Party is pretty much uncontested by serious candidates. So
Not Gene
getting
Phillips? Yeah.
yeah, no, yeah, poor Dean had it, but trying to get Democrats or people, let's say like yourself, to participate in the Maryland primary, if that were open, and to cross over to try an event to stop Trump, just to go ahead and appeal to the people who hate him, who know he's a rapist, speak that truth to power, but she won't do it. Like, what is she trying to do?
I mean, counterpoint, I think Jesus Christ himself could endorse Nikki Haley and Trump would still win this primary. I mean,
Yeah. Well, what is going on? Like, I mean,
I
he's
recently read
a
Tim
terrible
Alberta's
person.
book, and I'm going to mess up the title, but you guys, it's a really excellent book, and it's about how American evangelism or the American evangelical movement has basically become the religion is patriotism, right? And so they decide that anything that goes against Trump is like against Jesus or against God, right? And is ungodly. And I do think that Trump has become basically a religious cult figure for
Mhm.
a tremendous number of his supporters. And so, I don't think that there's anything Nikki. I mean, do I think that Nikki Haley has run an excellent campaign? No, but I mean, like as you said on your last episode of this show, she's not running a campaign to be the nominee. She's running a campaign in case Trump drops dead, right? That's the whole thing here. She knows she's not going to win. She wants to be the person with a couple of electoral votes in case he's like doesn't make it, right? In case the
Yeah.
cheeseburgers catch up with him.
But then it'll be Christie. No, there's all the true blue MAGA who will sweep in at the last minute and be appointed. You're right. I get that. It's just so disturbing, and to put it mildly, as a black person in America, that it just seems that, bluntly put, this is not a racist statement. I'm just looking at exit polling or whatever, that a majority of white voters are fine with just complete lawlessness, or that lawlessness does not matter if it's our guy. and it is just dangerous. I think you've written this week for Public Notice about Kim Paxton,
Mhm.
who is just, a lies pictorial, like the issues. It's just like this is what we be looking at, and it's not just Trump. It's like a whole sort of
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
the modern Republican Party. So, what's your, having written about the Paxton thing and so forth, what is going on with this
I mean,
party?
my take is that they say that, the barbarians are at the gate and we have to do what we have to do, right? So they'll justify any kind of lawlessness or un-American activity or, voting for a rapist because they'll say, well, Biden is the worst president ever. Biden is totally corrupt, or, Biden's letting in all of these, undocumented immigrants to destroy America. I mean, look, Elon Musk spent all of today, as we are recording this, tweeting insane propaganda, like great replacement, racist, crazy shit, saying things like, you know, that Biden is letting in all of these undocumented people because each person that he lets in is a vote for a Democrat. That's ridiculous. There's no state in the union where undocumented immigrants can just walk in and vote. Right? That's crazy. And then he had some nonsense about ballot harvesting. Like lots of people believe a lot of crazy stuff, but I believe that the crazy beliefs are retconning what they want to happen in the first place.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Well, I mean, as fellow Gen Xers, Bill Clinton in 1992 was the first time I voted, and I've spoken to people who have MAGA relatives or family members, and they talk about how the conversation made sense. It's kind of like, okay, we disagree, but I'm a Clinton person. You don't like Clinton because he didn't serve in the war. He
Mhm.
kind of a womanizer. These are things, and you prefer, like, there's sort of a reality that's occurring as to why you prefer uh George Bush the first,
Mhm.
and then Bob Dole, and then even with Obama, it's like you don't know much about him. It's easy for people to spread, but then you get to Biden, and it felt like there was kind of, okay, this is a guy. He's like old. He's been in it. He is literally before we were born entered the Senate, and has not has done any sort of crazy socialist schemes. He's the most normal person possible. Okay, and then that's the guy they staged the insurrection on. Like that is, it's just one of those it just felt like, oh my god, if it was this guy. Not to say that there's any justification for an insurrection, but it was just, wow, like this is, there is no kind of coming to sort of a consensus with these folks.
I guess I wouldn't say that they staged the insurrection against Biden, right? I think that that was a thing to support Trump, right? It wouldn't have
Right.
mattered. But what is interesting to me is that, like, on my show, we call him Ice Cream Joe because he's like so boring, right? In some sense, Joe Biden is like super dull, right? But like, so what are you going to say about Ice Cream Joe? So instead, they got to attack him through his screw up kid, and like, nobody thinks that Hunter Biden is a great guy. Okay. Hunter Biden did a bunch of like sleazy, sleazy stuff. And also, so what? Right. Like, I do I love it? No. Is it illegal? No. Is it common? Yes, it is incredibly common. And so, I guess my point is that they were going to hate Biden for whatever reason, but Biden is so boring and unobjectionable that they have to hate him through his son and slash or make up, the hordes of scary brown people at the border coming in, to like rape your grandma. I mean, this is all crazy. There's nothing. These people are so unterrifying, but that's what they do, right? They tell crazy lies to say everything out there is so scary that you need this crazy, lunatic Trump who is so tough and so manly, and forget that he's not neither tough nor manly, you know but you need this guy to protect you because otherwise, bad things will happen, like, undocumented immigrants will turn your kids trans or something.
Well, with the Texas standoff, with Greg Abbott, it
It's
seemed
nuts.
he was using a lot of, and as someone who's kind of, one of my jams being the history of both Reconstruction and the Civil War and so forth,
Mhm.
a lot of secessionist rhetoric that he tried to hide in a weird way with a sort of Jeffersonian rhetoric, 'cause, like with the Declaration of Independence, it's sort of like,
Mhm.
here's the list of everything that this tyrant has done and why we were breaking. And he sort of broke it down into sort of in his declaration of like what Biden as the tyrant had done and whatever. But if you also dug into what he was writing, it really matched a lot of what Texas itself had said when it seceded, which was, the federal government has broken its compact with us
Mhm.
and so forth. And so there's a lot of that, which sort of brings us back to the Georgia case, because I remember thinking, okay, well, whatever Trump might try to do with federal cases, the Georgia case, he can't pardon himself against that. He can't do, but also he could, even as president, just refuse to um
Right, to submit
accept
to process, right?
that's it's good
What's he
that
gonna do? Yeah, I would agree with that, and there's been some of there was argument because of the New York prosecution, which, turned into this kind of, whatever's gonna happen, but the argument during his first term was that sitting presidents are immune not only from criminal prosecution, which was a like, nobody kind of argued that even in a state prosecution, but they were immune to criminal investigation. So I think functionally, if Trump is elected to another term, that case is going to die. I think they're all going to die. I mean, watch it happen. That the only one that goes is the New York one, the one that we've
Mhm.
all laughed at as being kind of weak sauce, and watch that be the only one that he's actually convicted on before the election. That would be extremely funny and also extremely poetic and a kind of a wonderful loop to come back to, since we spent so much time during the Trump administration talking about Stormy Daniels and Michael Cohen and all the rest of this. Like, that'd be pretty funny.
Yeah, you've Ice Cream Joe, as you called him. I'm obviously concerned when I see bad polls or any bad data because it's concerning if Trump were to win again. And I
Although,
try to to put everything in perspective and
mhm,
study everything. But it does seem strange that because yes, when people would say, "Oh, well, Biden's behind, but Obama was behind at this time," I would then say, "Well, that was Barack Obama also versus Mitt Romney, who wasn't immune to normal political gravity. Like
mhm.
one gaffe ruined his campaign. It's very hard to like this. Trump is like under indictment for multiple felonies and it's not seemingly impacting him. Though it's weird because when I don't see how Biden. What do you think? I don't see how Biden is necessarily demonstrably a worse potential candidate than, say, Katie Hobbs in Arizona, Evers in Wisconsin, Shapiro. These obviously statewide races or whatever, but it seemed like post Dobbs and, one, people understood what was at stake,
Mhm.
abortion, and were coming out. In Wisconsin, we won the Supreme Court seat, and then also these MAGA candidates across the board were losing. Like Carrie Lake lost, in Pennsylvania, the MAGA candidate lost. So it just seemed,
Mastriano, yeah.
yeah, and uh, I don't the idea, but there's a sense of that Trump is very dangerous. I get why, because the threat of him is very dangerous. But
Mhm.
as a candidate, is he that much of a risk? Do you think that it's that hard to defeat him? Not that it will matter because he will be another insurrection because he won't accept defeat. But what's your
I look, we're a lot of months out, and you and I think about this stuff day in and day out, and we fall asleep going, "Oh God, no, not Trump again. I can't be in media for another 4 years of Trump." It, like, caused all my hair to fall out. But I think I think he's beatable, but I don't think it's going to be easy, right? He's a turnout machine on both sides, right? I mean, polling works in the midterms when it's not a presidential year. Polling is he I think he breaks polls, right?
yeah?
That the polling for 2022 and for 2018 was pretty much okay.
Mhm.
The polling in 2016 and 2020 was wildly off because Trump screws it up, right? Because he motivates all of this turnout from both Democrats and Republicans. He's super polarizing. I mean, I don't think that the country wants to go back there, but as you know, you can lose the popular vote and you can win the electoral college. So
Mhm.
I have no idea what's going to happen. I don't think he can win the popular vote. I'm
No.
quite certain he cannot win the popular vote, but I think he could win the electoral college because look how close it was the last time. I think Um, I think I was talking to my son who's like very into demographics. He works for the ACLU, and he seems to think that if Biden can do 1% better with white voters this time, it will be fine. I don't know that that's the case. Although, like, look, Trump does all of this crazy stuff. Like, didn't he picked a fight with the Teamsters this week? Like, are you kidding? Why would you do that? Just like nuts. He does all of these crazy things, right? Why did they do so poorly in 2022? In part because Trump saddled them with like the worst candidates, right? I mean, eh, remember, I guess that was 2020, but do you remember Herschel Walker? Herschel Walker was a bad candidate, and Herschel Walker was a, fully endorsed creation of Donald Trump, who thought that, and that was his own racist nonsense, right? He was like, well, Raphael Warnock's black, Herschel Walker's black. This is going to work. And like, no, it didn't work. That was ridiculous. So I don't know, right? It's hard to say what's going to happen. Trump is like the greatest turnout machine in this country on both
Yeah,
sides.
and it's unfortunate that our democracy has to hinge on this, but 2022 was encouraging because governors in key swing states, the MAGA can where we don't have to worry about what Kerry Lake's going to do or Mastriano or and so forth. And
Mhm.
so and Secretary of States, um, the MAGA Secretary of State candidates were lost, and it would seem the Senate math looks bad for us, but the House math does seem potentially in our favor that if Biden wins, that we will flip the House, and that would sort of, my understanding, cut off any potential for a real kind of soft coup of them throwing it back to the states or something, or and so like it just seems like we have some sort, but we don't know. I mean, that was kind of why, and I'm not going to make you talk about the 14th Amendment in the last few minutes we have here, but it's sort of one of the
Thanks.
cases of like he should have never, and again, we can blame the Republican Party for this for the rest of our lives. It never should have been a case of someone who did what he did being able to run for president again, given the potential for violence and the lives that he destroyed the last time.
Mhm.
Shay Moss, Ruby Freeman, like this he does true damage and to the country and to the nation, and that we're actually talking about him running again, knowing what's going to potentially happen,
Right.
to me is horrifying. Um, I wish I could be more upbeat about that, but I mean, he's not going to accept defeat. He's more, I mean, he would feel like his life is literally on the line if he were to lose, right?
Yeah, for sure. I would agree with that, right? Like if he does not win, like I think that most of these cases are going to get pushed off until after the election. But if he doesn't win, they're going to happen, right? These cases are going to happen, and he's going to go to jail, and not for an insignificant amount of time, right? These are, look, Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro, two of his advisors, they have been convicted and have gotten like 4 months for misdemeanor interference with Congress. We're not talking about 4 months here. We're talking about a long time in four courts. These are some serious charges, and I think he's, likely to be convicted, at least in DC. So I think that he is going to fight with everything that he has. I'm not, you know, I'm not seeing the same kind of warning lights, right? Part of what happened in 2020 was that there was all of these legal challenges to COVID voting accommodations, right? So
Mhm.
there was more absentee balloting, there was more, ballot boxes, right? The where you could deposit your ballot, right? There was a lot more stuff, and Republicans have since then kind of tightened up in some measure the voting, so that there is more vote ID and there's fewer ballot boxes. And like I think in Texas they passed some law that there was no more drive-through voting, which was a COVID accommodation, and I think they passed a law that there could be like one vote deposit mailbox per county, and whether that county had like 80 people in it or was Harris County, they don't care. So I think that it's going to be a harder case to make. Now, as we've said, Trump doesn't care whether it's nonsense. He'll say any crazy stuff he needs to say. But I think it's going to be a harder case to make now because there won't be all of these COVID accommodations for the ballot. And when they couldn't prove fraud, Trump's supporters pivoted to saying, well, these illegal Secretary of State imposed balloting changes, vote access changes were the real vote fraud. And that's not the case, right? That's not what those words mean.
Well, see, that's why I'm so concerned, frankly, about the escalating the invasion rhetoric and all the sort of stuff from the states,
Mhm.
like with Texas, because it seems like sort of setting up a, you know, Biden is enabling an invasion. Biden is against. We can't allow, forget democracy because it's been imposed. That type of stuff. And again, I'm not trying to be sort of resistance hysteria. I mean, it's just sort of, to
Mhm.
me, I often look at history and see certain moments where things exploded, and it's always scary when you're seeing those parallels. And Trump has been such a danger, and to see that sort of infect the entire party has been all because he just wouldn't accept a loss, like accept that, cut Trump loose. All right, yes, your party's going to explode. You're going to lose for a couple more election cycles, but it's better than the alternative. But it seems like the party's not taking that option. They're going to try to like run the tables again, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, if you wanna wrap up and think about it, I I I for a long time, you and I covered. I'm not sure whether you were covering the Mueller investigation, but for a long time, I think we all felt like, Mueller's coming, like that the
Yeah.
prosecutors would save us. And in some sense, this both of these the 14th Amendment challenges, the challenges to Trump being on the ballot, and the criminal prosecutions are in some sense putting reliance on external forces to save us. And no one is coming to save us but us, right? The only way that and we did it before. We saved us because we voted. And I I would like I would like to believe that we can save us again, right? That's the only way out of this nightmare is for,
Mhm.
for us to vote and for our kids to vote. I know that your kids are not, your son's not old enough, but my kids can all vote, and I certainly, think that they will. And I think that the kids are good, right? Like in some sense it's a demographic issue, and the kids are good.
Yeah.
If the kids will vote, we will be okay.
Mhm. Yeah, it's just the threat of the violence, what Trump does. I'm hoping he can be defeated, taken away, and we can try to then just sort of deal
Right,
with
we'll still be
Republican.
locked in the country with, like, a bunch of crazy people, right? We'll still be
Yeah.
locked in the country with the people who have watched Fox News or worse, OAN and Newsmax, for hours and hours every day and believe all kinds of crazy things, and that, the vaccine contains microchips and whatever. There's nothing we can do about that in the short term. But, I don't think that the courts are gonna save us, and, the Republicans certainly weren't gonna save us out of a sense of, like, civic duty with like Mitch McConnell refused to impeach Trump, and said, "Well, we're not going to do this because the courts can take care of this problem later." Um, nobody's going to save us. We're just going to
No.
have to save ourselves.
Yeah, well, I agree. That's a great call to action. Thank you so much, Liz. Let me put the banner up. You already have it, but let me
Thank you.
lawnchaospod.com.
Yep. Lawn
Great
Chaos
podcast.
Pod. Thank you. It's at Patreon and Lawn Chaos Pod on Substack.
And please subscribe, pledge your support. It's great work, and always a pleasure talking to you, Liz. And thank you for joining us. This will be up pretty quickly because everything in Trump world happens so quickly. But like, share, subscribe, and we will catch you next time. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you. See you guys.